Well, good day, and thank you for joining us for our session on MTSS implementation in California rural schools. We are very excited about having you with us for the next 90 minutes. We wish we were in person, but we're glad we have the opportunity to do this virtually. My name is Dawn Miller. I'm joining you from the Swift Education Center, housed at the University of Kansas, and I was really excited to work with my colleagues, whom we all work as part of the research group for the California Rural Education Initiative or Network, and Colleen will be sharing a little bit about that at the end of our presentation. But I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Colleen Myers to share a little bit about where she's from.
Hello. Thank you for joining us for this very important MTSS implementation in rural schools. My name is Colleen Myers, and I am a elementary school principal in Hollister, California, in San Benito County. And this is my 23rd year in education. I recently became involved in the California Rural Ed Network about 5 years ago, and am totally convinced that this is a worthy cause, and we need to get the message out there. And I'm excited to bring this presentation to you.
Hello, everybody. I'm Dr. Peter Stoll. I come from Humboldt County, California, which we'll show you later where that is if you don't know. And really pleased to be here with my colleagues, Dawn and Colleen. I am the coordinator of prevention and intervention services with the Humboldt County Office of Education. For the past 15 years, I've been very involved in the special education world, overseeing mental health and behavioral services for students with disabilities. And about 6 years ago, started with the effort to create the Northern California MTSS Coalition and build support for districts that are looking at school climate work, and some of what we'll be talking about today. And so I'll get into that later, but really glad to be here, and we'll enjoy this time together for sure.
Thanks, Peter and Colleen. So what we put together for our time together is to emphasize a few. One is just grounding us in equity-based MTSS, what we see as an opportunity and a necessity. To share with you some of the research findings of the impact of MTSS across California, and then specifically with California rural districts. And then Peter and Colleen are going to do a little deeper dive into some great bright spots of implementation across the counties that they serve. We really miss having a synchronous session where we can be interacting and hearing what's on people's minds and have you sharing some of your work and asking questions. So we encourage you to share your good thinking about, is anything we're sharing resonating with you? Is it making you think of your own exemplars? Is anything standing out? And we encourage you to use the hashtag of Inclusioneers as well as hashtag for Swift Schools. So just to ground us in the work of California MTSS, this work was formally launched with funding in 2016. Prior to that time, there was fantastic work that had been going on around what we would think of as California MTSS by other names, specifically positive behavior and intervention supports, as well as response to instruction and intervention. What they all share in common is a focus on prevention, teaming structures, data systems, holding on to evidence-based practices, and then engaging in some type of a continuous improvement, problem solving, or some cycle of inquiry to be continuously and dynamically making decisions. Those two worlds kind of came together through this funding system under the umbrella of MTSS to be able to kind of do this holistic whole child lens for academic behavior and social emotional supports with a real eye toward the integration of those systems and thinking about how we meet the needs of each and every student. The particular California MTSS was led by Orange County and Butte County with county participation across all 58 county offices of education. And we felt really fortunate to be one of the partners, the Swift Education Center, one of the partners in the work. And we had at that time an evidence-based framework that we had been putting into place and researching over the course of the previous 5 years. And California was able to take that evidence-based framework and then adapt it to have that real spotlight on inclusive social and emotional instruction. So this is kind of a picture of the framework, and it includes 5 domains and 10 features. So each of the rounded corner rectangles represents a domain. So you see the multi-tiered system of support, administrative leadership, integrated education framework, family and community engagement, and inclusive policy structure and practice. When we originally kind of rolled this framework out, they were all in columns just side by side. But the work that we did with our original 5 states, 16 districts, and 64 schools, those outcomes started to show themselves, to show multi-tiered system of support as really being the driver of those outcomes, with the other 4 domains kind of being necessary and supportive to make MTSS what we need it to be for an inclusive system. And I share that because, and give time to this slide, because as we share some of the research that we've been doing and the tools that we've been using, those tools mirror looking at all of these areas. So you can kind of get a sense of what types of questions would be part of that assessment that's done at the site level. In 2017, the California leaders with this work, as well as Dr. McCart from the Swift Education Center, really started to blend in and spotlight this notion of equity being a real centerpiece for the work we're doing with California MTSS. And they shared this particular quote, and I would love to see some tweets about this quote, because every time I read it, I'm in a different time and place in my own world, and different words stand out to me for different reasons. But they shared the equity in education demands each and every student in a community be invited, welcomed, and given a sense of belonging in a system of teaching and learning that's fluid, responsive, dynamic, and alive, and uses all available resources to meet student needs. So this latter part of a system of teaching and learning that's fluid, responsive, dynamic, that's the MTSS pieces being put into motion. But this first part really can give us pause to really think about how our system looks and is experienced by students that are in our care. So when we think about a child who has a student with a significant disability in their classroom, then they really get to that real clear picture that the adults in that building see that student as belonging there. When students' first language is honored, then that's a really nice indication that they are being welcomed. And we think about, systems that ensure that every student in the building has an adult in the building, or more than one adult, knowing something important about them that maybe isn't about their grades or their test scores. It really kind of gets at the heart of this notion of each and every, and is an indication that they matter. So we welcome you to really have discussions about what this looks like. And in those who serve rural communities, I think it is a really beautiful place to see rural education shine and be a model to other communities. So we see this notion of equity-based MTSS as an opportunity and a necessity. So as we're thinking about building what our system looks like, we want to be really equity-minded and thinking about whose voice is at the table, whose voice is heard and not heard, where our opportunities are and access points are, of who has access and opportunities, and how can we ensure that that holds true for everyone, and making sure that there's really solid representation in what we build with MTSS that would be reflective of all of our students in our communities. So let's turn to looking at some of the research findings. First, I'm going to start with the impact of California MTSS on outcomes overall, and then we're going to drill into rural. And Peter and Colleen and I were kind of excited because I think that the first part is in publication right now, and the second part is not yet in publication. So you guys are seeing these outcomes for the first time. So we're kind of excited to share that with you. The tool that these are based on is the Fidelity Integrity Assessment. We'll make sure all of these are open source. We'll make sure that you have access to these links. And this is one that you can see all of the items. They are questions that are done by a building leadership team, and they mirror that framework that I spent some time on. So the first, we're looking at our outcomes across California. And for this particular research question, we were looking at originally, and starting in 2017-18 was our first year. And we had access of schools that participated, of about 600 and some odd schools that participated for the consecutive 2 years. For this particular research question, we were looking at elementary sites, and we were looking at elementary sites that we could find a really nice matched comparison site that was not involved with California MTSS. So for this particular one, it was narrowed down to 42 sites. And so you can see the dark bar, the darkest bar is the score on the FIA around implementation for 2017-18. The lighter bar is the subsequent 18-19 school year. So as you're looking at this and you're seeing that, wow, that's good. There's gains made across all domains across the 2 years, with the more prominent domain being administrative leadership. And I'll share with you that this is exactly what we found with our original 5 states and 64 sites, that administrative leadership tended to be the strongest and the one that grew fastest. And I want you to see that that multi-tiered system of support is the lowest ranking in year 2. And that's kind of exciting when I share with you the outcomes, meaning that we don't have to have all of the pieces and parts put in place to really start to see the fruit of our labor. So that was how these the 42 sites that were involved with California MTSS for 2 years. And this is their looking at those that were in the implementation group and those compared to a matched control group that had a very similar demographics, similar size in a similar area, similar staffing, a variety of factors that made them good matches. And not only did the implementation group make more gains than the matched control group, but those gains were also statistically significant. Now that was true in ELA. That was not the case in math, although the implementation group did make stronger gains than the matched control groups. But the gains that were made in math were important, but they weren't statistically significant. And I share that because we're going to now look at what do we see in our rural settings. So this was our first opportunity to look at just rural settings. And you can see that those that were involved with us in 17-18, as well as in 18-19, showed gains overall in the FIA score, about the same as it was as we looked at all schools, well, not all schools, but all that were involved in a previous research study. When we look at their gains in ELA and math compared to other matched controls, and for the ones that we had 2-year participation, and we looked to really find good matched controls that were not involved, that group narrowed down to 14 rural schools that we were comparing. But you can see on here that in the reading for those that implemented for 2 years, that gain was very clearly visual, and it was statistically significant in terms of the improvement. The math showed a stronger effect size than it did in the non-implementation sites. It just wasn't statistically significant. So very similar to what we saw in sites outside of that area. So you'll get to read more about that, hopefully, when we get this in publication. But there's your sneak peek in terms of really knowing that when we focus on MTSS, it matters and makes a difference in terms of outcomes, especially in ELA. So I want to turn to people talking about, so what does it mean to be implementing MTSS, and what did it mean to us? So we're going to do some bright spots of implementation by first going to Humboldt County and then winding back to Colleen in San Benito. And I want to share that we're going to make available to you an equity report card, which we have found provides really good jumping points for conversation, because it not only represents some of the kind of the technical pieces we think about when we think about MTSS implementation, but it also kind of gets into our underlying beliefs and values that are important when we talk about equity. So Peter and Colleen are going to use this report card to highlight some of the things that really jumped out for the sites that they're going to be sharing against. So with that, I'll turn it over to Peter.
Thank you so much, Dawn. I'm always excited to talk about MTSS, and I'm going to tell you briefly why that is. You know, we work, you know, diligently when we're in graduate school, and I had the amazing opportunity, and actually Dawn and I shared a professor, but when these ideas really came to the University of Massachusetts when I was in graduate school, it was fascinating because we were really looking at a shift in practice. And as we know, systems change takes time and commitment, and it takes data like this to really drive that why, as well as some other things we'll talk about here. But what was wonderful is when California MTSS initiative began, and we had that initial meeting with Swift Schools and with California, sponsored by California Department of Education. We were down in Orange County. Butte County was there representing rural education. And what I saw for the first time, really, and that framework that we were looking at earlier really captures it. But it was a way to organize best practice research and the need to change how we're doing business as usual for better student outcomes, and to support our communities, and to be part of that in a state and watching that initial rollout felt incredibly special. And I'm going to talk a little bit as well on how it's, I say on a smaller scale, but not a state scale, but a county scale. I'm really seeing, a commitment by districts in the county office to move forward with this type of work. So, said I'd tell you where Humboldt County is. There we are. We border Del Norte County to our north, and from where I sit, it's about an hour and a half to the border of Oregon. We're very rural. We have about 6 tribal entities that are in Humboldt County. We have 33 school districts, and 2 of those LEAs being housed in the county office. And we have charter schools and small schools. Our largest school district is Eureka City Schools, with about 10,000 students. And we have some schools that can take about 2.5 hours to get to from here, that maybe have 12 to 15 students. So it's very very spread out with a real variety of districts. We live in a beautiful place. I was telling my colleagues it's pretty smoky out today, so hopefully you're in better air quality than we are right now in this time. But that's our coast. There's a shot of our coastal region. We have some of the most rugged coastline in California. We also house redwoods and mountains, And that's not Nealon School there, which has 12 students, but that is a school called Greenpoint, which is, I always feel like excited to drive to Greenpoint because it's such a beautiful drive and it's a very unique school. But it exemplifies, these small districts that we have. With I think there's about 18 students at Greenpoint School. So, the impact of MTSS in Humboldt County. So I'm going to highlight schools, but at first, let's just talk about the county as a whole. In 2015, we were able to start as I mentioned before, the Northern California MTSS Coalition. We're engaging schools with, working with PBIS and training their teams and working with their teams towards implementation. We've trained 650, educators and community members in restorative practices in Humboldt County since that time. And it was really exciting because 1 year into the Northern California MTSS Coalition, the state initiative was rolling out, and I had the honor to be the Region 1 lead for our 5 northern counties doing that work. And at that time, working with California, MTSS is really our phase 1 of implementation. It was a time for teams to get together, really examine system change, look at resources that they had, and really understand implementation and improvement science to a degree that they could start moving that work forward. Now we're really looking to scale that up in a more intensive way in providing more district support. But overall, we have high trauma in Humboldt County. MTSS is trauma responsive and equitable, and education for equitable education for all students. This conference is focusing on inclusion. Inclusion is a cornerstone of this work. You can see that in the area of what, and looking at universal design for learning for inclusive classroom environments. But again, it's an evidence-based framework, and it works really well in rural areas because often the question is, hey, do we have enough people to do this work? We don't have the resources. We don't have the money. What we really look at doing with this MTSS work is aligning the resources that we have, the adage, working smarter, not harder, and bringing our initiatives together so that we don't have multiple teams all working on varied things, but we're really aligning our resources and working in a collective way. And between districts is what we do here a lot as well. So it's also a response to indicators. In California, we have something that's called the dashboard. We also have something that's called differentiated assistance and comprehensive support and improvement. And these are all indicators that are, ways that the state can come in and say, listen, we need to improve in these areas. MTSS is a response to these indicators, right? We have high special education numbers in Humboldt County. Some of our districts are at 22%, which is almost double the state average. So we need to bring those numbers down. And through comprehensive MTSS, we see those rates decreasing. And also, as Dawn had mentioned, it's culturally responsive and inclusive in that way. So we're seeing this shift in practice. We're prioritizing social emotional learning during this time. That's essential. During all times, it's essential, but especially during this pandemic where we are more distant than we would like to be. And it's a lens to really look at, policy and practice. So we're looking at scaling up, and we're actively scaling up the capacity of our COE. We've started a prevention and intervention program or department at the county where we're working with individual districts on these initiatives. We're partnering with Placer County with their PBIS efforts and working with various school districts on that. I'm going to skip on to the next slide because I don't want to take up too much time. So, because this, I need to give time to one of our local elementary schools, which, you know, in parentheses, you can see it was traditionally called the South Fortuna Elementary School, recently renamed their elementary school the Linnell K. Walker Elementary School. Linnell Walker was the administrative assistant that sat at the front desk of that school. And she made everybody who walked through those doors feel like the most special person. You know, every time I walked in, she would greet me in just such a lively and expressive way. Dr. Peter, you're here. How are you? Just, it was, you know, and she was, you know, in many ways, the central heart of this school. You know, 2 years ago, she succumbed to cancer. It was sort of a quick illness for her. And the school just named itself after her legacy. And this school is, you know, when I highlight this school as a school that has implemented PBIS and MTSS to a high level of fidelity, I think of Linnell. And I think that, you know, part of it is when you have that level of engagement and that level of spirit central as the face of your school, there's also, it sort of sets this tone. And so I believe that she was a strong influence on the school climate at South Fortuna Elementary School and the work that it continues to do. You know, as far as the report card goes, I didn't spend a lot of time with this report card, but we are doing this actively with our districts. So I'm remiss that I apologize for not scoring these schools on the scorecard, but I know that Colleen has. So we'll move on from this point. But strengths and accomplishments, the fidelity of Tier 1 PBIS at this school was very high. And we know that through looking at, you know, working with their teams and looking at what we call the TFI, the Tiered Fidelity Inventory, and looking at Tier 1. For those of you who aren't familiar, because I don't even think we show a triangle in this presentation, but our Tier 1, it means universal interventions for all students. And that would be across academic, social, emotional, and behavioral domains. And while we're looking at all of those, you know, those tiers, because we need to, right? What we really look to do is make sure that there's a good, solid, universal foundation in place. How we, you know, one analogy I like to think of is that if we have an intervention, say we have a mental health intervention for a student, or we have an academic intervention for a student, right? If we think of the universal intervention as being fertile ground, right? So if we bring in an individualized type of intervention, we need fertile ground to plant that seed in so it can flourish. If we have a behavior plan for a student that's involved and they're going into a Tier 1 that isn't rich, that doesn't have a high level of supports, the likelihood of the intervention working is not as high. And that's true for academics and behavioral as well. So we really focus on strengthening Tier 1 first. The district was very committed, and this particular school site was incredibly committed to restorative practices. So they were using restorative practices preventatively, as well as an intervention to create inclusive discipline practices. You know, traditional discipline practices could be considered exclusive. We look at restorative practices as bringing those who need to be closer to the school, and not sending them away. There was a high level of, and is a high level of, community engagement at this school site. And so every 2 weeks there are PBIS assemblies, and, you know, PBIS, positive behavior intervention and support. And one of the pillars that you'll see in the MTSS framework is community engagement. And one way that we really want to engage communities is in this positive way, to celebrate and share successes that are happening at the schools, make those events culturally sensitive, and really help create that that two-way communication with the community. And the school really engaged the community, and also provided interpretation, and some of the songs were in Spanish language, so it was very inclusive. So that cultural integration and celebration is at the core of what this school does. The school also became a model for our county in establishing a sensory room. And the sensory room really has been replicated at other schools in our area. So this is a place where a student can go if they're scheduled to go there, or can access this to regulate their emotion. And so there's various stations. The student will enter, of course, with an adult who's leading them through this experience. They identify a couple words on the wall. I'm feeling frustrated. I feel like my brain isn't working, whatever that is. And then they choose 3 activities in the sensory room. Some of those activities would be, a crash pad, which is a big pad that they'd run and jump on and crash onto, or there was a sand tray and a water tray and a weighted blanket, various things. And they really find that when you move students through and give them time to do this sensory regulation, we find that the student brings down, right, that high level of stress to a place where that they, are more proximal to learning. So wonderful intervention. The school is engaging co-teaching and universal design for learning. Co-teaching and universal design for learning are 2 of the key elements of inclusive classroom environments and lead to positive, inclusive experiences for all students. They were implementing and are implementing the school-wide information system, which is a data system which provides behavioral data so that we can make informed intervention decisions that are very specific to the school's needs. And we saw a real decrease of suspension and chronic absenteeism. And as Don highlighted, and it's nice to see that there's this, that state trend, but with that solid MTSS, or working towards a solid MTSS, there was an improvement with ELA. So real quick, I'm going to move through this one quickly because there's another slide that I want to spend a little bit more of my time on. But another district we are working with is Pacific Union School District. This is a K-8 district, in our county. Strengths and accomplishments, I'm going to really jump towards that. We have a very engaged school climate transformation team there. The school has a very committed staff with very high retention rates with their staff. Again, high implementation of restorative practices. They have a real commitment to professional development for their classified and certificated staff. And I really appreciated how much time they set aside and how much commitment they had for their classified staff to really look at systematic supervision of the playground and positive reinforcement systems in ways that they could be trauma informed in the ways that they're interacting with students on the playground. The district is very committed to mindfulness across all the grades, which is wonderful. And every morning, it's really wonderful. I know this because I would provide supervision to somebody on that site. And so on Thursday mornings, I'd be there and the mindful minute would happen. And there'd be a ring of a bell and there'd be a breath, and you'd feel this collective breath that would happen throughout the whole school. They would talk about their goal of the week and what they're, and then move into this place of just calming the mind and calming the body. And then they would highlight a student who'd been successful that week on that morning. So, this teacher would like to thank this student for doing this and helping move, the school culture forward or their classroom environment forward. Really meaningful, really powerful stuff. Again, their team was meeting, consistently and continues to. They have very robust tiered meetings. So again, back to that tiered idea of tier 1 being universal. So that's our tier 1. So they'd have meetings looking at school-wide efforts, and then also moved on to tier 2 support. So this would be kind of their student study team hybrid, where they'd sit and they'd talk about students who are needing a little bit extra. Maybe they don't need a referral to special education. Maybe they don't need individual counseling. But what could we do in small groups to assist these students in, moving them back in a preventative way back into the general population. Again, a very inclusive strategy, these tiered teams. So, and then of course, IAPs, which are individual education plans for students with disabilities, and behavior plans or counseling or whatever that is, they have a tier 3 team as well. So really embracing that language and that idea of prevention. So this school as well did many strong community events, engagement, and culturally responsive in those as well. Really impressive work they were doing there. And they also committed to hiring one of their teachers as a reading interventionist. So they're using co-teaching models to provide robust tier 2 interventions, again, small group interventions within an inclusive classroom environment to intervene early for students with reading. We know that reading is one of the number one predictors of success in high school, and we really need to focus those efforts there. So and then there's the image in the upper right hand part of the screen is an image that they put together that represents the cultural element of the Native community. They're very involved with the Northern Humboldt Indian Education Program, and there's 9 of our school districts in Humboldt County that are working with the Northern Humboldt Indian Ed Program. So, and then the picture under there is they also have this wonderful community garden, which they use as an intervention space to get kids engaged out there, and it's a really nice community touch. So there is my Humboldt County Office of Education mask. We all received one at the beginning of the year. So that's a little selfie I took at my desk there for you to, in the spirit of COVID-19 and, protection and prevention. I want to talk a little bit about some MTSS adjustments with COVID-19, and then I'll be passing this section off. But in asking districts what it was that they needed most right now, they really responded and said, you know what we need help with? We need help with distance learning. I'd say about 30% of our schools are in person right now. Maybe not that many, but pretty close, 25 to 30%. In one part of the county, there's a couple schools that are using a hybrid model, which is some in person and some and mostly distance learning. My daughter, who's 10, her charter school has distance learning for Monday and Tuesday and Thursday and Friday. And on Wednesday, students have an opportunity to either in person or on the computer meet individually with their teacher, which I think is a wonderful academic as well as social emotional intervention for students right now, to have those one-on-one relationships and opportunities to check in with their teachers in a way, it's clearly a way that we can screen for social emotional needs for students. But the distance learning playbook for K-12 was the foundation of a series of some online summer institute that we provided school personnel as a county office. And so it was really exciting because there was synchronous learning for 2 full days. There was 3 cohorts, so 6 days in entirety for the county office to take people through the elements of the distance learning playbook. And then there's some asynchronous learning similar to this, where folks are plugging in and digging deeper into those elements. And then we have professional learning communities or mentoring groups where our learning specialists and prevention and intervention specialists are facilitating small group discussions relative to some of those asynchronistic events and some of the things that are in this playbook. So that has been incredibly helpful. And again, when I think about an eye on inclusion, with distance learning, it's a wonderful opportunity to create inclusive environments for students and bring all students into those general education experiences with their peers. Another wonderful resource is the 3 Signature Practices of Social Emotional Learning by a group called Castle. And this has been really wonderful because a lot of districts have been very concerned about the social emotional, as they should be, well-being of their students in their classroom environments. And there can be pressure, to implement a large curriculum and to roll it out. And how are we going to do this in a distance learning environment? When you look at the 3 signature practices, that could be even, any meeting. This is relevant to all of you. If you're having a meeting with a group of people, it's a way to ground at the beginning. One of the signature practices is a collective grounding for everybody at the beginning of the meeting so that they're feeling connected, right? So that could be as simple as a series of breaths. That could be what was something that was wonderful that happened over your 3-day weekend. We just had a wonderful 3-day weekend, or whatever that could be. And then the second signature practice is engagement. Making sure that everybody has a voice, that we're engaging everybody, and that opportunity is provided. A wonderful thing on some of our digital platforms like Zoom is you can easily create breakout rooms and bring people together as small groups. And then the final signature practice is, some sort of an optimistic ending, to the time together. So this would be a class experience. This could be a meeting that you're having. But then what are we doing? How do we come together? It doesn't have to be cheerful, but what are our actionable items? What is our shared vision? Or how do we close that in a way that feels good and forward thinking? So we're working with our teachers and all of our staff members and our administrators to adhere to these types of practices as they work with their staff and their community. So, but we're still moving forward with, of course, our teaming, training, technical assistance preparations. It's looking different. So, a lot of our districts and our school sites have an MTSS team or a school climate transformation team or a school climate team or a PBIS team. Whatever they call it, it's a team that's really looking at their system and how to bring about lasting change. And this time allows us and affords us the opportunity to engage on a different level. But that doesn't mean that we cannot, we should still be meeting with our teams. We can still be providing training and technical assistance and looking at what's happening right now, but also looking at how are we going to prepare students as they come from a distance learning environment back to an in-person environment. Because one thing that we know right now in this time of COVID is that there's a whole set of behavioral expectations that didn't exist in March. Mask wearing, social distancing, hand washing, all of those things. And what is this going to look like for teachers? What is this going to look like for our paraprofessionals, our admin, and especially our children and families? So we're looking at creative ideas to teach those expectations and use this time to prepare for strengthening our school environments and coming back together. Some of the work that we've been doing when we look at positive behavior support or positive behavior intervention and support, many of you have heard of PBIS. Again, like MTSS, it's not a program. It's a framework of best practices. How do we work around behavioral education for all students? And there are elements of positive behavior support that we're really wanting to support and push into our home and family environments. Really looking at this idea of reinforcing opposed to taking things away when things happen, that we can really motivate students by, or our children and our families by creating, structure, consistency, stating the expectation before it happens, recognizing positive strides toward those behavior expectations. And so we're really, there's a lot of good information that we have as educators and service providers that we can impart to families and provide them some explicit engagement. One thing we want to keep in mind is, we don't want to, be just disseminating and just training families. What we really want to do is it's those signature practices, right? How do we have that warm tone? We're here to assist. What are some things that we can help? We want to engage with you. What are some goals that we have towards the end? So kind of keeping an eye on that level of support through behavior expectation videos or whatever those things look like. I'm actually working with a group right now, and they are puppeteers, and they do social emotional work in the form of puppet shows, and they're used to doing assemblies at schools. But what we're doing now is providing them with a setting and helping them, getting teams together to help inform their content so that they can create videos for some of the, these little children that are really going to need some preparation before they come back to school. So when I think about, those children that are really needing support, it's going to be those kindergartners or TK through second grade. Everybody needs that, but that real explicit instruction on what it's going to look like when they come back to school. So with that, thank you for the opportunity to share that information. I'm going to pass this off to Dr. Colleen Myers, San Benito County, and it's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Peter. I really appreciate the this time. It's fun to do these sort of things because we always get to learn from one another, even though we've been working together for some time. It's been nice to get together with Don and Peter and talk about the things that we love the most, MTSS. So I am an administrator in San Benito County, and you can see San Benito is nestled right there in the heart of California. We're not quite the coast, we're not quite the valley, so we have an in-between. A little history behind San Benito County is it was a hub for Henry Miller and the cattle industry way back when. So our high school, we have one high school in the county, and their mascot is a hay baler. So that's because we provided all the feed for all of the cattle industry way back when. So we do have some really great things in San Benito that are happening, and I'll get into the demographics and particulars, but using this equity report card was really helpful, and I encourage you to take a look at it and see how it applies to your situation, because it really kind of grounds the focus of your MTSS implementation, regardless of school size, regardless of population, and who's involved. And so there's some that we did that we found collectively amongst our smaller districts. And it's not a surprise that we had some that consider all resources as for satisfying students' needs. And our districts do also, they have a student-centered approach for not only resources or schedules or whatever that they need. It's really keeping the student at the center. So they're doing a really great job on that. And then they know that they have a voice. So I think little by little, our little rurals are gaining momentum along with the California Rural Ed Network that's just started a few years ago. Our rural schools and administrators and teachers are coming together and gathering a larger voice and learning from one another. So that's part of that equity. And I think, Peter's so well spoken, and I really appreciate, what he included in there for the COVID adjustments. And I think the largest thing that's come out of this for me being at the largest district in our county and for all of our rurals is the equity piece and how we cannot exclude. We may, previous to COVID closures, we may have had the bodies in the seats, so we felt like we were getting to everybody, but now we're really concerned that we're getting to everybody, all the students equitably. So that's kind of nice to taking a look at this report card and just evaluate, where can we improve, what are our strengths and what are our growths. So San Benito at a glance, it's we serve 11,000 students, TK through 8th grade, in 11 districts. 5 of those 11 districts have an enrollment under 50. So we are not large in size, but we have a significant number of our students in a rural district. So single school districts have the separate school boards. So they have, you know, the local people making decisions for their little schools. All of them have standalone superintendent and principals. 3 of those 5 have superintendent principals who also serve as teachers. So that's really a unique situation where you have somebody who's not only making multi-grade level lesson plans, but they're also writing their LCAP, and they're also, in some cases, maintaining the schoolyard, they're maintaining the facilities. It's really a multi-hat situation. And then San Benito is home to California's smallest school district with an enrollment of 4. And I added that picture there. I happened to catch Pinoche Elementary at a day where they had 100% participation. So I wanted to take a picture and show that to you. So we're small, but we're mighty. And the impact on San Benito County that we saw, I was working for the County Office of Education in 2016. We actually sat at the same table as Peter in Costa Mesa when the Swift Center and Orange County Department of Ed came together with this whole California, scaling up California MTSS. And we thought, okay, what is this? What's going on? And how does this apply to us? So from that meeting, the team that I was a member of became the Region 5 lead training team, and that included Santa Clara County, San Benito, Monterey, and Santa Cruz counties. And we started to look at how MTSS was going to make a difference in our districts. We were delighted not only to be the region leads for this training, but we were delighted to be one of the first counties to get 100% of our districts trained in MTSS. Probably because they're so rural and they grasp every opportunity to come together and collaborate when they get the chance. So we felt that it was really important to bring MTSS to San Benito County as we thought about what it meant and where we can go with it. But it was really going to address the limited capacity that we saw in our districts. We had, you know, like I said, teachers that were superintendents and principals and teachers. So there were a few people responsible for everything in the entire school. We needed to figure out how we could help those standalones and become more efficient with their instruction so that their students could prosper. Then, you know, with that, there was limited access to substitutes. So that was a challenge. You can't, when you live 45 minutes away out of cell service, you can't just call and say, I'm out sick today. There's no substitutes that will come. So you have to either call the families and cancel or delay or whatnot. I think now with this whole COVID-19, we're actually going to probably leverage the Zoom connections more. But, you know, traditionally, it's nice to come together and break bread and shoot ideas off of one another. So that was really a hurdle on that we wanted to address. And then we also wanted to address the limited resources that that were up to date for educational trends. You know, how do we disseminate information to our little schools that don't have a time? You know, they're writing, for example, Amanda at Pinoche, she's writing 4 different grade level lesson plans in a day and then implementing them and then writing her LCAP at the same time. So how can we give them the most current research-based, evidence-based educational trends without overwhelming them and making we want to make their jobs easier. There was also that issue of isolation, that they were physically distant from job alikes. There wasn't a connect. How could we create information hubs? How could we bring people together? Of course, along with that was the adverse road conditions. Literally, you cannot access one of our districts if there's inclement weather, and if you blow a tire, it's all on you because there's no cell service. So we wanted to make sure that we could overcome those things, and then the ability to collaborate with other teachers and administrators, and knowing across the state there's many other people that are similar in similar situations that, how can we connect them? And that's really where I felt like the work from the California Rural Ed Network was going to help our county. And then, of course, the limited funding, this funding structure that was just kind of wonky. We had one school district that I'm going to talk about in a little bit was hit with a water system that was not, it didn't pass. It was contaminated, and it was just going to decimate their whole budget. And how can they survive that and continue educating their students equitably with this now huge financial burden? So then what we wanted to do after we kind of realized what our districts needed is that we wanted to take MTSS from theory to practice. We wanted to develop the concept of building capacity, staff development. We wanted to define or refine a system of culture. A lot of our school districts have strong community cultures, and it's fantastic. But how can we make sure that we don't have any implicit bias in those established norms that we have, and so that we are not excluding somebody inadvertently? We also wanted to anchor the work in the LCAP so that we were working off of, let's minimize the plans and make it easiest as possible for our districts to organize what they're going to do, where's the funding going to come from, and who's going to do it. And then we also wanted to see how we could build tier 2 and tier 3 supports in these little rural schools, because if they're them by themselves, they can't do a push-in because it's them by themselves. Or if they have limited staff, how can they build those tier supports through a collaboration amongst themselves or with the County Office of Education? And then taking into consideration implementing a PBIS program, the positive behavior, the IS part, implementing PBIS so that they have a good program for taking care of their kids. And how are we going to do this? We were going to commit staff and community. We were going to use universal screeners because we didn't have those in place in many of those rural schools. They were just, assigning grades per the publisher. And we may know that that's not always the most accurate. So how do we know what we're doing and how do we measure it was really important. And making sure that we were using inclusive classrooms appropriately and maximizing that staff when we get it in to the classroom. And then joining in the monthly rural principal meeting hosted by the County Office of Education was so important. That it was done, those were held once a month. Typically the rural principals would come in again for the LCAP PLN, but it was a great time for them to come together, and they talked about many common themes that pertained only to themselves. And so that was a really great opportunity for us to provide them MTSS training and support as they look to develop their programs. So I just mentioned a school that was significantly impacted by their water system going out. I think the last number I heard was like $80,000, which is like well beyond their budget. But this is Bitterwater Tully. This is actually bordered, this is our farthest school. And it has 2 classrooms, and they have about 35 students. They have an aide for each classroom, and it's a fantastic little school. It's surrounded by ranches and cattle and farming community agriculture. So it's really great. They have a fully inclusive classrooms. There's Molly there. She's 100% included in the mainstream, and they have an intense parent engagement and support system. They have Hot Lunch Fridays where the whole community comes and brings lunch, and they sit down and they eat together, and families get together. In this area, it's quite common to have like a branding where everybody comes together, all your neighbors, and they'll come and they help support taking care of the branding and the processing of the cattle and getting them on where they need to go. So it's kind of that same sort of activity, but it's centered around the school, and it's really fantastic. I happened to go out one day to Bitterwater and Grandma was there. And Grandma is well into her 80s. She owns a large ranch in South County, and she likes to read to the classes. So the classes sit down. She reads stories from her childhood. So at this time it was Peter Rabbit, and it was just really heartwarming how this woman who, you know, got into her ranch truck at the end of the day and drove off to go do something ranch related, had taken time out of her day to come to Bitterwater and read stories to the children. And so they had that lens of, you know, what it was like back then, what it is now, and where they can go. So that's a really great strength of Bitterwaters. So then going back to Bitterwater, they also had their inclusion in their classrooms. They were able to leverage using the aides really well. And so although they didn't have a great number, like I said, 35 enrolled in each class, they were really smart about how they provided their tiered interventions. And they did a lot together. So they had reading buddies that matched up. A lot of them are, you know, they treat each other like family anyways. The students are very close to one another. So it was really interesting and encouraging to see how Bitterwater took the tiered interventions and tried to apply that with minimal staff and leverage, you know, the relationships of students to advance academic and behavior progress. So our largest rural school is North County Joint Unified School District, and they are in North County, and they have about 700 to 800 students enrolled each year, and they have one teacher in every grade level. They have a superintendent principal, and then they have a director of curriculum. They have a full office staff and with yard duties and whatnot. It's a really fantastic school that's acquired many recognitions. They've done really well recently. But MTSS was really eye-opening for them, and it was really great. I saw a lot of improvement from them and a lot of growth, and that's why I wanted to include them in today's presentation. So their Tier 1 supports, they called it What I Need, or their win time, was to provide enrichment. And before, they had sort of a willy-nilly enrichment time. They didn't come, and sometimes it conflicted with ELD. So if you had this, you couldn't take this, and there were some exclusion issues there. So they sat down and they really came up with a program that embedded the ELD in the core curriculum so they didn't have to do it separately, and that all students could participate in their enrichment. And instead of just a random cycle, they offered 6-week cycles, and they did for 1 day a week. So everybody could participate and take advantage of the support they needed, whether it was in math, language arts. They opened up their library so students could go in and work on devices in a quiet place if they needed that. And so they really were targeted and strategic in making that win time effective. Then they also had, before the MTSS training, they had grade level buddies, but it was random. It was like this teacher, and so those teachers would do something together, and their kids would do, you know, little fun things. But after MTSS, it was really the behavioral part of MTSS that really resonated with Jenny, the superintendent principal. And so she said, you know what, we're going to do this as a community builder. All grade levels are going to participate. We're going to pair teachers. So the TK and Kinder was with 6th grade, 1st grade with 7th grade, 2nd with 8th grade. So the kids would then grow with one another. And so as they grew, they were able to take on the younger ones. So they stuck with their partners for 3 years. And it was really a fantastic thing that she implemented there. And that really helped develop some partnerships and relationships on the school grounds, so that, you know, when a little one had an issue, they knew where they could run to. They did have split recesses and whatnot, but when they saw them on campus, it gave them like a belonging. That person knows me, and it's not an authoritative figure, but a safe place to go. So that was really helpful. And then she took care of the tier 2 supports and the enrichment opportunities for all students. She extended they did extended day 2 times a week for the whole entire year before it was in sections. And they implemented a universal screener. They implemented Orton Gillingham and the preventing academic failure, so that they had a nationally normed, a grounded, research-based screener that gave them great feedback on where they need to go and how they're going to get there. Then they also had an intervention teacher that before just did random push in here and there based on IEPs or supports or teacher requests, and it moved into more of a co-teaching model, so that she had a structured day. The teachers could rely on where she would be and who she's going to work with, and really build their own supports too as a co-teaching team. So those were really great things that North County was able to put out after MTSS. Then I'll go to Southside. Southside Elementary is a TK8, and they were our knowledge development site. So they were the very first district that we chose in San Benito County to participate in the MTSS trainings. And so they went along with us to Fresno County for all the trainings and how we're going to do this and roll out. Southside has about a little over 200 students. They do have one teacher per grade level, and they have one administrator who's a superintendent principal. They have an office staff, and they have a librarian. They have some yard duties and support. They have an art teacher. And so they have some unique situations there with that 200 enrollment, which isn't, they have enough staff that they can collaborate, but the staff doesn't have a peer at the grade level to collaborate. So it makes it kind of interesting there. Their strengths and accomplishments for MTSS was that they needed to identify and maximize their resources through the FIT. So Southside has always historically been a very strong academic school, and parents would, fight and cry and kick to get into Southside. So it just was this process that they did really well. But when you went down to it, they wanted to identify and maximize those resources of what we're not using already and how can we help the school go even further. So they used the FIT through the Fidelity implementation tool, and in identifying little pockets that they might be able to repurpose and change their path. They implemented PBIS. They're now in year 3, and that was unique because they're just one teacher per grade level, and how can we come together? They're doing really well with that plan, despite their small school size. And they've designed a collaboration among staff. Like I said, they had difficulty because they don't have peers that are, I can't go second grade level team meeting. It's more of a across the grade, a primary and an upper elementary collaboration. So they were more strategic in designing opportunities for students to participate, teachers to participate in collaborative conversations. And they refined their services from the county office in the areas of the SELPA, special education and mental health. They were really wanting to take advantage of all resources. Again, it goes back up to the first bullet, identifying the resources that are there that they may have not implemented before or leveraged before. We have an issue in San Benito County that our support in the mental health areas, the rural schools have difficulty getting the support from the county because of distances and staffing and all sorts of things. So that was a focus that they really wanted to improve, not only for themselves, but countywide also for all students here. Southside is they have full inclusion. They have a support person that comes out from the County Office of Education that helps the student and the teacher. So that grows. That's also something that's nice that the teachers can talk about that, I had so-and-so last year and this is what worked. This were her triggers. These were her triggers and that sort of thing. So they really worked on that and refining it. They maximize their technology resources and their interventions. So they had that innovative mindset where they were thinking, how can we use other things to help us in the areas that we're not quite strong in? So again, they also took advantage of finding a universal screener so that they knew for sure that those students were on target and who was missing certain standards and whatnot. And then they have a model of shared leadership. So they have a really great roundtable staff that is able to converse and contribute to the growth of the school, and they check in regularly. So all of this, the MTSS adjustments with COVID-19 for San Benito County was obviously the quick adaptation of technology platforms. So right away we had teachers that had never even Zoomed before, had never had a Google Doc before. They had to be in a hurry, ready to adopt and implement technology. And so I think that was good. It was kind of like they were pushed in the pool and they had to learn how to swim. But in the meantime, what they did is they leveraged their relationships with the families, which are super strong. And so it was really nice to have that family check-in right off the bat. They did packets, of course, and so they would have a check-in with the student and the parent when they came to pick up their packet, and then send them on their way. They would send, they scrambled to get devices for their folks. Some folks didn't even have or still don't have internet or even cell service, so it was really difficult to reach those kiddos. And so it was kind of an interesting situation where the staff would have to, okay, we really do want to take it to the technology realm, but in the same respect, we still have families that can't even get cell service and they're going to have to work offline anyways. So the benefit also to them is that some of them are still serving students face-to-face, the hybrid model like Peter had mentioned. So they're doing either 2 days face-to-face, a day off and another 2 days. Some are doing 1 day face-to-face so that they can make sure they can check in and see their kiddos and make that connection. They also are embedding SEL practices such as mood meters in their daily routines. I think that really accelerated the implementation of SEL in their program by this COVID-19, because they really can't see their kids. And if you know rural schools, they love their children as if they were their own, right? They're all family members. And so not knowing how students are doing is really a heartbreaking thing for them to accept. And so implementing SEL practices and educating parents on how to read the moods of students and how they're doing, how we respond to trauma, what trauma could look like, those sort of things were important to implement. And then I had mentioned previously that some of the superintendent principals and teachers just simply packed up their stuff and they would go to the home and said, I'm here, I'm going to do a lesson with both of you, or, we'll be out on the front lawn and we may have to see, the cows strolling by, but, here I am, I'm going to help you. They just are so tenacious in getting this instruction to their students. And I think so another adjustment that they had to do, and I think that's probably, I mentioned before, a benefit is adapting to the virtual professional development. So now I think we really realize, okay, I can participate in a virtual professional development and get what I need out of it. Because when you're facing an hour drive into town and an hour back out to home, it's just not feasible to attend a professional development session. But if you can do it virtually, I can just click over and log in, then that really does help. So COVID's been, challenging for everybody, but I think it's been really a door opener too. It's expanded the parent education to include behavior and social emotional learning, as I mentioned before. Now teachers are able to get with parents and say, this is what we're doing. This is what we need. The whole child needs to be attended to. And it's not just academic. we need to do all of these things so that we can have a productive citizen in our society. And then lastly, I think the adjustment that has been a benefit from COVID-19 has been pulling together. So through the California Rural Ed Network, we've been having meetings and whatnot, and bolstering our resource bank on there, and bringing job-alikes together so that they can bounce ideas off of one another. And it's so important, I feel, that especially with the implementation of MTSS, how adults can get together and say, well, I did this, how did you do this, and what worked, what didn't, how would that apply to my situation? And that's what I really appreciate about the California Rural Ed Network doing for all these folks and during this time of COVID-19. So again, the equity report card we had, they just are really student-centered, and I could check all of these boxes on this. I encourage you to take a look at it again and see how it applies to you. But when you look at the ones that you're like, wow, these students really benefit from this district because of these things, you can sleep at night and you feel good. It doesn't solve all the problems, but at least it can shift your focus to where you want to go next, and appreciate this or celebrate the things that have happened in the past. So with that, I want to close with a quote, and by Alice Walker. Look closely at the present you are constructing. It should look like the future you are dreaming of. So I think more so than ever, we're standing on the verge of greatness. And this is just a pivotal point in our history. It's not to say that diminish the value of our past, but looking forward and how we can serve students as a whole. I know that I'm telling my teachers that, let's step back and be mindful of what is really important, because in the future, as Peter had said, we're going to have TK and kindergartners that have never gone to class together. So they may come in as first graders or second graders. They don't have that foundational social structure down. They've been in a house for a long time or sheltered for a long time, and we need to make sure, how is our future going to benefit from what we can do right now, and dare to dream. So I also want to encourage you to join the California Rural Ed Network. It's a fantastic network. I, of course, am biased. I'm so happy to be a member of the research team there with Dawn and Peter and several other fabulous folks. But it's super easy. Just go to California Rural Ed Network and put in your name and join. So we've got, as you can see, a resource bank. There's some leadership opportunities. There's some California MTSS specific resources, and it's just great. We have a summit annually. However, we didn't have it this year since it was right at the cusp of shelter in place, but it's just a good opportunity to come together and find like-minded people. And lastly, I want to go over some resources from SWIFT, really fantastic stuff. If you have there, this presentation will be linked so that you can follow along. And then we have, so like the FIA is there, your MTSS, the field guide, the framework, the scheduling tool, the resource inventory, and the data profile and whatnot. So with that, I will turn it back to Dawn if there's any questions. Thank you again for being here. Dawn, any final words? Peter?
I'll just share, every time I have the opportunity to be with you guys and here, it just gives me such hope and such pride for what all is being done. And, I have shared the California Rural Ed Network concept across Kansas and Oklahoma and Vermont, some of our other states that have very rural settings and such strength. And you guys are, I'm really proud to be part of it because it's a model for the nation. So I hope people will join. It's no cost. That site that you brought up, it's like basically let us know you're out there. And it was dream child of Dr. Susan Huckinen, and now we are all really proud to be under the leadership of Rindy Duvall and other great people.
And I'd like to just add that it was an honor to present with both of you. And Colleen, your optimism is an important quality that I think is a difficult thing to hold on to right now. And so in closing, I was sharing with Dawn the other day on the phone that I feel that this time, this pandemic, the social unrest, the fires, so many things are happening in our world right now that are immediately affecting us. And with that comes an increased vulnerability by everybody. And when we look at silver linings, I really do feel that vulnerability brings authenticity. And the authenticity of engagement, the authenticity even of this conversation is so important to hold on to those things. And so there's going to be these silver linings that come from this time, like you were saying, standing on this precipice of greatness. And I think those silver linings we need to take with us into the future, not like, oh, this is something we need to leave behind us, but how is this tool that helped me? How is this idea that helped me? How is this way that I engaged helped me? And take that forth. So your optimism was very well appreciated. Thank you.